Hi, it's Alison from the Law School Toolbox. I'm here with Lee, and we're talking about how to be a more successful 1L in your second semester.
All right. We love deep work here at the Law School Toolbox. So one of the things we want you to spend some time considering is, how are you going to set up your schedule so you have time for deep work? Deep work is where you do the heavy lifting. You're wrestling with material, you're creating study materials, you're doing practice. This is where the magic happens.
And I think this is so important. And I think it's so important to do it early on and to do it consistently. And the reality is you need larger chunks of time typically to do this. So we say sort of 3 to 4 hour chunk. I would say ideally at least once, preferably twice a week from the beginning of the semester. So in the beginning, you might not have that much to put together. But the problem is if you don't start working with it and kind of compiling it and making sense of it, you're going to have a lot when you start to look at it a month in.
Yeah. Better to start early, chip away at it. Don't ever feel behind. So I think as you think about your deep work, one of the things that you want to do is think about what kind of study aids were helpful for you in your first semester classes. And so what are your study aids going to look like this semester? Did you learn what worked with you? Did you learn what worked for you and what didn't? And do you need to make some changes?
Right. Yeah. So I learned at the end of my first semester that what seemed to make sense to me was making flowcharts. And so that's something that, I kept doing because it helps me think about the material and make sense of the material. And it was a great reference on an open book test. But if your test is a different format, then maybe that's not so helpful. You kind of got to work with the situation that you have in front of you.
Yeah. So you also want to think about, as you mentioned, like where are you going to find the time for that deep work? I think it's great to have a consistent time that you put on your calendar. And then when you're looking at that calendar, maybe you should just pick a date to really have your outlines started and then also completed and just drop it on the date because you should have your final exams on that calendar too. And I think that looking at the semester as a whole is a really worthwhile thing to do as you're trying to figure out, how you're going to allocate your time for this deep work.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've talked about before is there's kind of a difference between planning and preparing to do the work and then doing the work. And you kind of need time for both. So, for maybe say, if you plan to on X date take a practice test, maybe the week before you block out an hour to find practice materials for the test I plan to take the next week. Particularly people who maybe don't have such, natural executive functioning skills or maybe have ADHD, things like that. You really have to block out the time to prepare to do the task. And then when you get to do the task, it's just like, okay, here's what I've already figured out. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to start doing this, and I'm going to complete it. And then I think that's going to be a lot more effective.
Yeah. And then the practice is a much more contained task. And it doesn't take as long either.
Right. You're not using the mental energy to find the question because you already did that and then you went on about your life. And 2 days later, you sit down and you have the practice question and answer ready to go. Yeah. And maybe you block out another hour the next day to review it. So you're not trying to do everything at once.
Yeah. I also think that you want to think about how early you can start to practice when you're looking at that calendar, realizing that just after you've learned just a bit of law in your semester, you can start doing practice questions, even if they're pretty narrowly formulated. I mean, you can even ask our friends Claude and Chat GPT to draft some for you. I mean, they will do that. So there's no shortage of questions.
They can be on focused topics. And even if you need some multiple choice, like they may or may not, they can generally do a pretty good job. They may not be totally accurate, but that's actually even a good process for you to go through is to figure out, why doesn't this seem right to me? So I don't think you could just, turn off your brain. And I have an episode recently with a law professor talking about how to use AI productively in law school. But, to say that like, oh, I can't find a hypo is like kind of ridiculous at this point because you have an endless supply of them.
Yes. I think it's also important to think about how you're going to get feedback on that rating. So are you going to give yourself feedback? And if so, how are you going to do that? Are you going to get a study group together and exchange work and give feedback to each other? I think there's value to that. Do you need to get feedback from academic support? Do you need a tutor like our team? But you do want somebody to evaluate your work. Because that's very important to make sure that you not only understand the law, but that you are doing enough legal analysis and that it's robust enough to make sure that you're prepared when final exams come. So that is a piece of the practice puzzle that you can't ignore.
Yeah, and I think early in the semester is really the time to gather all this information. What type of exam do you have? Is it long essay, short answer, multiple choice? Is it open book? Is it closed book? What samples does your professor have on file? Because if they don't have any of this, then you need to start asking those questions early so that for example, that your entire exam is going to be multiple choice, which I would probably prepare differently for that than I would if I had one giant essay. Thanks everyone for watching. Check us out at lawschooltoolbox.com and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything.
Stay tuned as we continue the conversation about how to set yourself up for success for the second semester. And be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything else you'd like us to discuss or tips you'd like us to share. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second to give us a like and leave a comment. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any future content. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com.